Act like you love me, please." The poor girl begged the Millionaire CEO in front of her ex. The evening rain had left the city streets gleaming like polished onyx, reflecting the amber glow of streetlights and the distant shimmer of high-rise windows. Inside Mason's diner, tucked between glass towers on 5th and Madison, Sonia Brown moved between tables with practiced grace, her movements still carrying the ghost of what she used to be, a dancer who once commanded standing ovations, now balancing plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. At 26, Sonia was breathtaking. Her dark skin seemed to catch and hold light, luminous even under the harsh fluorescent bulbs. Her natural hair, pulled into a neat bun, emphasized the elegant curve of her neck, a dancer's neck, long and graceful. Her deep brown eyes, once bright with dreams and determination, now held something quieter, something resigned. The white apron tied around her waist couldn't hide the posture she'd never quite lost, even after 2 years of serving coffee instead of pirouettes. "Order up, Sonia," the cook called through the window. She smiled automatically, the kind of smile that came from muscle memory rather than joy, grabbed the plates, and delivered them to table 6. As she turned to head back to the kitchen, her co-worker Jasmine appeared beside her, holding a cream-colored envelope between her fingers like it might bite. "This came for you," Jasmine said, her expression uncertain. Courier dropped it off. Looked expensive. Sonia's hands trembled slightly as she took it. The weight of quality paper, the embossed lettering, the faint scent of expensive cardstock. She knew before opening it what it would be. Still, seeing the words made her stomach drop like a stone into dark water. "Donald Harris and Victoria Sterling cordially invite you to celebrate their wedding at the Plaza Grand Hotel this Saturday at 7 p.m. Her fingers trembled. She read it again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less cruel. Donald. The man who had whispered promises into her skin after late-night rehearsals. The man who had called her his beautiful butterfly, who had traced the arch of her feet and said he'd love her through anything. Through injury, through doubt, through the hard seasons when applause faded and bills piled up. Until anything became a shattered ankle, 3 surgeries, and a career that ended on an operating table instead of on stage. He'd visited her exactly once in the hospital. She remembered his uncomfortable shifting, the way he couldn't meet her eyes when the doctor said she might never dance professionally again. The silence that stretched between them like a chasm. 2 weeks later, he'd sent a text, "I can't do this. I'm sorry." No call. No explanation. No goodbye. Just silence where promises used to be. Now he was marrying Victoria Sterling, daughter of the Sterling Hotel empire. Of course he was. Donald had always been good at trading up. Sonia dropped the invitation onto the counter like it had scorched her skin. That night, in the tiny apartment she shared with her cousin Maya, Sonia lay on the worn couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. Rain tapped against the window in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. The TV played low in the background, some reality show she wasn't watching. Maya emerged from her bedroom, took one look at Sonia's face, and sat down beside her. "What happened?" Sonia handed her the invitation without a word. Maya's eyes widened as she read it. "That son of a..." She stopped herself, took a breath. "You're not going." "I don't know," Sonia whispered. "Part of me wants to. Part of me needs to see that I survived him leaving." "Sonia, baby, you did survive. You rebuilt your whole life. You've been teaching ballet to kids at the community center. You're saving money for physical therapy. You're standing." But Sonia wasn't sure standing was enough. Not when the invitation felt like a calculated insult, a reminder of everything she'd lost. Donald knew she'd lost her career, her identity, her future. And now he was flaunting his new life, his perfect bride, his world that had no room for damaged dreams. "What if I went?" Sonia said suddenly, sitting up. "What if I showed up and proved I'm not the broken girl he left behind?" Maya studied her carefully. "And how would you do that?" Sonia didn't have an answer. But the seed was planted. Maya came closer, her voice softening. Listen, you've survived what he couldn't even face. You're stronger now. You're warrior strong. And if you're going, she paused, meeting Sonia's eyes, you're not going alone. Sonia raised a brow. Right. I'll just grab Idris Elba from the hallway. Maya smirked. Girl, you never know. The universe owes you something big. Saturday evening arrived too quickly. The Plaza Grand Hotel rose before her like a monument to everything she no longer had access to. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. Women in designer gowns, emerald green, deep purple, shimmering gold, glided past, their laughter light and careless. Men in tailored tuxedos held glasses of champagne that probably cost more than Sonia made in a week. She felt every inch the imposter. Her pale blue dress, elegant, understated, found at a consignment shop with Maya's help, whispered rather than shouted. It draped beautifully across her figure, the silk catching the light with every step. Her hair fell in soft, glossy waves around her shoulders, framing her face. She'd even splurged on a car service, unable to bear arriving by bus or subway to Donald's fairy tale wedding. She had come alone, but she had come. As she moved toward the ballroom, her ankle, the one that had been reconstructed with pins and prayers, began to ache. Phantom pain, her physical therapist called it. Sonia called it memory, her body refusing to forget what it had lost. She whispered to herself, maybe I'll pretend to be lost, have one drink, then vanish. Turning to leave before she could change her mind, the doors opened, and she was swept inside by a group of laughing guests. And there, across the room bathed in golden light, she saw him. Donald Harris, looking exactly as she remembered, handsome, charming, his arm possessively around a petite blonde woman dripping in diamonds. Victoria, presumably. They were surrounded by friends, everyone beautiful, everyone belonging, everyone whole. And then Donald saw her. His expression shifted in slow motion, surprise, then something that looked almost like guilt, then something infinitely worse, pity. He whispered something to Victoria, and they both looked at Sonia. Victoria's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile that said how pathetic. They were coming toward her. Panic seized Sonia's chest like a fist. This had been a terrible idea. She'd walked straight into her own humiliation, delivered herself to the wolves wearing a borrowed dress and foolish hope. She turned to flee, to escape before the confrontation could begin, and collided directly into someone solid, immovable, and impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. I'm so sorry, she stammered, stepping back. Strong hands steadied her by her shoulders. She looked up and up, into the face of a man who seemed to command the very air around him. Tall, with sharp, aristocratic features and piercing dark eyes that saw too much. His suit was definitely custom-made, probably Italian. His presence was magnetic, the kind that made people instinctively step aside, made conversations pause, made rooms rearrange themselves around him. Her words caught in her throat. Standing before her was Joseph Bliss, the Joseph Bliss, CEO of Bliss Enterprises, billionaire, brilliant, known for being cold, calculating, and completely untouchable. She had seen him before, once or twice, when the community center had received a generous anonymous donation that turned out to be from his foundation. They had never spoken beyond a courteous nod at the charity gala where she performed a brief dance demonstration for the children. Still, she had remembered him. How could she not? Today he looked exactly the same, tall, commanding, his gaze sharp as cut glass. But up close, she could see something else. Something beneath the ice. Something almost sad. You teach ballet at St. Michael's Community Center, he said, recognizing her. His voice was smooth, calm, like expensive whiskey. Sonia flushed. I do. I mean, yes, I still do. I'm just, she gestured vaguely at the ballroom behind them, suddenly aware of how out of place she must look. Sorry, I shouldn't have bumped into you. He studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. made her feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and electric. "You look like you're about to run." She glanced back. Donald and Victoria were getting closer, cutting through the crowd like sharks. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I need to leave." He gave a polite nod, already moving to pass, but something cracked inside her. The shame, the years of feeling less than, the weight of being left behind, the sting of Donald's betrayal, the phantom ache in her ankle, it all rose up at once like a wave she could no longer hold back. Before she could stop herself, before logic could intervene, before fear could silence her, she turned abruptly. "Wait." Joseph stopped, turned back to her. She didn't have a plan, only a plea, raw and real and desperate. Her voice broke. "Act like you love me. Please." There was silence, long and loud and electric. Behind her, she could hear Donald's voice getting closer. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to just her and this stranger and the impossible request hanging in the air between them. Joseph studied her, her trembling hands, tear-rimmed eyes, the desperation that made her words fall like a whisper, like a prayer. His expression shifted, something flickering in those dark eyes. Something that looked almost like recognition. And then, quietly, he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not with pity. Not with mockery. But with something that looked almost like he'd been waiting his entire life to hear those exact words from her. "Come with me," he said quietly, his voice firm, steady, certain. He extended his arm. Sonia stared at it, stunned, then looked up at him. This stranger, this powerful, untouchable man, offering something he didn't owe her. There was no pity in his expression, no arrogance, no judgment. Only something steady, something protective, something she didn't yet understand. She placed her trembling hand on his strong arm, and walked with him into the lion's den. The ballroom shimmered like something out of a dream, or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks, casting soft, romantic light across everything. Soft music floated through the air, a string quartet in the corner playing something classical and achingly beautiful. The scent of roses and champagne swirled through the air, expensive and intoxicating. Joseph walked beside Sonia, his posture calm, composed as if he belonged here, which of course he did. Men like Joseph Bliss belonged everywhere. Sonia, however, felt every step like a stone in her stomach. She hadn't imagined the wedding would be this grand. Gold trimmed everything, the chairs, the table settings, even the napkins. Waiters in white gloves offered hors d'oeuvres she couldn't pronounce. Ice sculptures shaped like swans wept in the corners. It was the kind of world she had once brushed against, before the accident, before Donald left her in a hospital bed with silence and a crumpled goodbye, before her dreams shattered along with her ankle. Now she stood here again, but this time with Joseph Bliss at her side, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. Warm, steady, real. As they entered deeper into the ballroom, conversations dimmed. Eyes turned. Mouths whispered. Sonia Brown with Joseph Bliss? Isn't she the one who? The dancer who fell. What is he doing with her asterisk? Asterisk. The buzz of speculation built like static electricity before a storm. Sonia's heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it, but she kept her chin up, kept her dancer's posture straight, kept her fingers from trembling where they gripped Joseph's arm. He leaned down, his voice low and reassuring in her ear. Ignore them. She swallowed hard. Easier said than done. Then pretend. His lips curved slightly. You asked me to act. So let's give them a show they'll never forget. A familiar voice cut through the music like a knife. Well, if it isn't the fallen prima ballerina. Sonia turned, her breath catching. Donald Harris stood before them, and he looked just as she remembered. Charming smile that never quite reached his eyes, perfectly styled hair, expensive tuxedo that screamed old money, and eyes that always knew exactly how to cut, how to wound, how to make her feel small. Beside him stood his new bride, Victoria Sterling, in a couture gown that probably cost more than a car. She was dripping in diamonds, at her throat, her ears, her wrists, each one catching the light with every calculated breath. Her blonde hair was styled in an elaborate updo that had probably taken hours. Victoria looked Sonia up and down slowly, deliberately, her expression curling into something between amusement and pity. "You're brave," Victoria said sweetly, her voice dripping with false concern that made Sonia's skin crawl. "Coming here, alone." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Alone. Unwanted. Forgotten. Joseph's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "She's not alone." The words were simple, but the way he said them, cool, commanding, with an edge of steel, made Donald's smile falter. Donald's gaze shifted to Joseph, and Sonia watched the recognition dawn in his eyes. Confusion first, then realization, then something that looked dangerously close to fear. Or maybe envy. "Joseph Bliss," Donald said, extending a hand, his smile suddenly forced, his charm suddenly working overtime. Joseph didn't take it. Donald. The name fell from his lips like a judgment. Cold. Final. Dismissive. Sonia could feel the tension building like heat on her skin, could feel every eye in the ballroom turning toward them, could feel the story being written in real time, the girl who fell and the billionaire who caught her. She just hoped she wouldn't fall again. The silence that followed Joseph's cold dismissal was deafening. Donald's hand hung in the air for a moment, ignored, rejected, before he slowly withdrew it, his practiced charm cracking at the edges. "I see you've moved up in the world, Sonia," Donald said, his voice carrying just enough volume for nearby guests to hear. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It never had. From teaching children in rundown community centers to, what? Networking at high society weddings. The words landed like slaps. Sonia felt her cheeks burn, felt the old shame rising up her throat like bile. This was exactly what she'd feared, being reduced, diminished, made small in front of everyone who mattered in Donald's world. Victoria laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Donald, don't be cruel." She turned to Sonia, her expression dripping with false sympathy. "We heard about your unfortunate accident. Such a tragedy. You were quite promising, weren't you? Before." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "Before you fell. Before you broke. Before you became nothing." Sonia's breath caught in her chest. Her ankle throbbed, phantom pain mixing with real memory. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself, but no words came. The old paralysis was setting in, the one that had haunted her since the day Donald walked away. The feeling of being voiceless, worthless, invisible. But then Joseph moved. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But somehow, everyone in their immediate vicinity felt it, a shift in the air, a change in temperature. He stepped closer to Sonia, his hand sliding from where it had been resting formally on her arm to the small of her back. Possessive. Protective. Unmistakably intimate. "You seem to have mistaken my date for someone who requires your commentary," Joseph said, his voice low and dangerous. Each word was precisely chosen, delivered with a kind of cold authority that came from years of commanding boardrooms and crushing competitors. "Let me be clear, Sonia is here with me. As my guest. Which makes her off limits to whatever petty games you're playing." Donald's face flushed. "I wasn't." "You were," Joseph interrupted smoothly. "And now you're done." Victoria's eyes narrowed, her mask of sweetness slipping. "How chivalrous. Though I have to wonder how long this little arrangement will last. Sonia has a habit of being temporarily interesting." The cruelty in her voice was like poison, sweet and deadly. Sonia felt it sink into her skin, felt the familiar sting of being dismissed, of being seen as disposable. But this time, she wasn't alone. Joseph's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her back, not painful but grounding. Real. He leaned down slightly, his breath warm against her ear. "Trust me," he whispered. "Just trust me." And then, before Sonia could process what was happening, before her mind could catch up with reality, Joseph turned her toward him. His dark eyes met hers for one electric moment, asking permission, offering protection, promising something she couldn't quite name. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. Then he kissed her. Not a peck. Not a chaste brush of lips for appearances. A real kiss. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close against him. Close enough that she could feel the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart, the strength in the way he held her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. His lips were warm, firm, commanding but not forceful. The kiss was confident, claiming, but somehow also asking, "Is this okay? Are you okay?" Sonia's eyes widened in shock, then fluttered closed. Her hands, which had been frozen at her sides, came up to grip his lapels, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. The ballroom, the guests, Donald and Victoria, everything faded into white noise. There was only this, the heat of his mouth on hers, the way he tasted like mint and something darker, something intoxicating. The way her body fit against his like it had been designed for this exact moment. The kiss deepened for just a heartbeat longer, then Joseph pulled back slowly, deliberately. But he didn't let her go. His forehead rested against hers for one brief, intimate second, his thumb still tracing small circles on her cheek. When he turned back to face Donald and Victoria, his arm stayed around Sonia's waist, keeping her tucked against his side. The ballroom had gone silent. Or maybe Sonia's ears were ringing. Either way, every eye was on them. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Whispers exploded into barely contained conversations. Phones appeared, discreet but unmistakable, capturing the moment for posterity, for gossip, for tomorrow's social media feeding frenzy. Joseph's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. Cool. Calm. Absolutely deadly. "Let me be very clear about something," he said, his gaze locked on Donald, then sliding to Victoria with icy precision. "Sonia is not your entertainment. She is not your cautionary tale. She is not your punching bag for whatever insecurities you're projecting onto her." He paused, letting the words sink in. The silence was absolute now. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. "She is my fiancée." The word landed like a bomb. Fiancé. Sonia's breath caught. Her eyes widened. She looked up at Joseph, stunned, but he didn't look down at her. His gaze remained fixed on Donald and Victoria, challenging them to contradict him, daring them to question him. Donald's face had gone from flushed to pale. "You're what?" "My fiancée," Joseph repeated, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "So when you insult her, when you diminish her, when you treat her like she's somehow less than you, you're insulting me. And trust me, Donald, that's not a position you want to be in." Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. Her hand tightened on Donald's arm, her diamonds catching the light as her fingers trembled slightly. "Congratulations," she finally managed, her voice tight. "Quite the surprise." "Life is full of surprises," Joseph said smoothly. He finally looked down at Sonia, and the expression in his eyes, soft, almost tender, made her heart stutter. "Isn't it, darling?" Sonia couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only nod slightly, her fingers still gripping his jacket like a lifeline. Joseph turned back to Donald and Victoria with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe they're about to announce the first dance. Enjoy your wedding." It was a dismissal. Complete and absolute. Donald opened his mouth. Whether to argue or apologize, Sonia would never know, but a harried-looking wedding coordinator appeared at his elbow, gently guiding him and Victoria toward the main stage where the photographer was waiting. As they walked away, the spell broke. Conversations resumed, Louder now, more animated, everyone desperate to discuss what they just witnessed. The string quartet started playing again, as if trying to return normalcy to a night that had just been turned upside down. But Sonia barely noticed any of it. Joseph's arm was still around her waist, warm and solid and real. He guided her smoothly away from the crowd, toward a quieter corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering city below. Only when they were relatively alone, as alone as two people could be in a ballroom full of curious eyes, did Sonia find her voice. What? She had to stop, clear her throat, try again. What did you just do? Joseph's expression was unreadable. What you asked me to do. I acted like I loved you. That kiss was necessary, he said simply. They weren't going to stop. Words weren't going to be enough. So I showed them. By calling me your fiancé? Sonia's voice rose slightly, a mixture of disbelief and something else, something she couldn't quite name. Joseph, you can't just, people are going to believe. Let them believe it, he said calmly. What's the alternative? Letting Donald and his new wife spend the rest of the evening making you their verbal target practice. Sonia stared at him. This man, this stranger who had minutes ago been just a name and a vague memory from a charity event, had just claimed her as his in front of half of New York's social elite, had kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, had defended her with a ferocity that made her chest ache. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for me? Something flickered in Joseph's eyes. Something old and deep and painful. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. Because someone should have done it a long time ago. The simple honesty of it hit her like a physical blow. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to cry here now, in front of all these people. The kiss, she said again, soft this time. Was that just for show too? Joseph looked at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, his lips curved into something that might have been a real smile. Not the cold, calculated one he'd given Donald. Something warmer. Something that made him look younger, less untouchable. If I was going to act, he said quietly, echoing his earlier words, but with something different in his voice now, something that sounded almost like truth, I might as well be convincing. Sonia's cheeks flushed. The truth was, she hadn't hated it. The kiss, the claim, the way he'd held her like she mattered. Like she was worth fighting for. For the first time in 2 years, since the accident, since Donald's text, since her world had collapsed, Sonia felt seen. Not as broken. Not as a cautionary tale. But as someone worth protecting. Someone worth standing beside. Even if it was all pretend. Especially because it was pretend. Across the ballroom, she could see Donald and Victoria on the dance floor, going through the motions of their first dance as husband and wife. But Donald's eyes kept drifting toward where she stood with Joseph. His expression was complicated, confusion, anger, maybe even regret. Good. Let him wonder. Let him stew. They're watching us, Sonia murmured. I know, Joseph said. His hand was still on her waist, warm and grounding. Let them watch. The orchestra swelled. Other couples joined the bride and groom on the dance floor. Joseph looked down at her, one eyebrow raised in silent question. Sonia hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. And as they moved onto the dance floor, his arms around her, her head against his shoulder, his hand splayed protectively across her back, Sonia let herself believe, just for this one night, that this wasn't pretend at all. Before we move forward with this incredible journey, can you feel the chemistry building between Sonia and Joe? If you're as captivated as we are, drop a comment telling us, Team Joe all the way, or do you think Donald regrets his choices? We can guess your answer correctly. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button now so you don't miss a single moment of this story. Or if you won't subscribe, at least tell us why in the comments. We genuinely want to know. And while you're at it, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, And what time is it there? We love connecting with our global soul-stirring stories family. 3 days after the wedding, Sonia found herself standing in front of a boutique on Madison Avenue, staring at her reflection in the glass. She was wearing clothes she hadn't paid for, carrying a phone that wasn't hers, on her way to an event she had no business attending. And somehow, impossibly, it had all become normal. After the wedding, Joseph hadn't just dropped her off at her apartment and disappeared back into his billionaire life. Instead, he'd appeared the next morning, Sunday morning, when she was still in her pajamas, her hair wrapped, halfway through a bowl of cereal, with a plan. "If we're going to do this," he'd said, standing in her tiny living room like a tailored giant among thrift store furniture, "we need to do it properly." People saw us. They took photos. By now, every gossip blog in the city knows about us. "Knows about the lie, you mean," Sonia had corrected, but her voice had been weak. She'd spent the entire night replaying that kiss, the way he'd held her, the warmth of his hand on her back. "A lie that protects you," Joseph had said quietly. "Unless you'd prefer I release a statement saying it was all a misunderstanding? That you're not my fiancé, just someone I took pity on for one night." The thought of that, of being reduced to a pity case, of Donald and Victoria seeing those headlines, had made her stomach turn. So she'd agreed. Now, days later, she was living a double life. Waitress by day, billionaire's fiancé by night. It should have felt absurd. It should have felt like playing dress-up. But standing there in a silk emerald dress that probably cost more than her monthly rent, her hair styled by someone whose last name she couldn't pronounce, her skin glowing from products she'd never be able to afford again, Sonia had to admit something terrifying. She liked it. Not the clothes or the money or the attention. She liked the way Joseph looked at her. Like she was real. Like she mattered. "You look beautiful," Maya had whispered before Sonia left for tonight's event, some charity gala at the Museum of Modern Art. And terrified. "I am terrified," Sonia had admitted. Of what? The cameras? The people? Of forgetting this isn't real. Now, as Joseph's car pulled up, sleek black with a driver who knew her name, Sonia took a deep breath and stepped inside. Joseph was already there, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a cologne commercial. But when he saw her, something shifted in his expression. Something that made her breath catch. "You wore the emerald," he said softly. "You sent 12 dresses. I had to pick one. You picked the right one." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "It matches your spirit." Sonia blinked. "My spirit." "Strong," he said simply. "Vibrant. Impossible to ignore." The compliment settled in her chest like warmth, spreading through her until her cheeks heated. She looked away, suddenly shy, something she hadn't felt since she was 17 and auditioning for her first professional company. The gala was everything she'd expected and nothing she was prepared for. Photographers at the entrance. A red carpet. Joseph's hand at the small of her back, guiding her through the chaos with practiced ease. Questions shouted from every direction. "Joseph, how long have you been together?" "Sonia, how does it feel to be engaged to one of New York's most eligible bachelors?" "When's the wedding?" Joseph handled it all with the smooth deflection of someone who'd been doing this his entire life. "We're keeping the details private. Tonight is about the Children's Literacy Initiative. Let's focus on that." But inside the museum, surrounded by abstract art and champagne flutes, the real performance began. They moved through the crowd like dancers, Joseph introducing her to CEOs and socialites, philanthropists and politicians. And he never let go of her. His hand was always somewhere, her waist, the small of her back, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, anchoring her, protecting her. "You're doing great," he murmured during a lull, when they'd stepped away from a particularly intense conversation about stock portfolios and tax brackets. "I don't know what I'm doing," Sonia admitted. "Half these people intimidate me." Half these people should intimidate you. They're sharks. His lips curved slightly. But you're not prey, Sonia. You're something they don't understand. What's that? Genuine. Before she could respond, a waiter appeared offering drinks. Champagne? Or perhaps tea for the lady. Sonia reached for champagne, but Joseph spoke first. Chamomile tea for her, please. Light honey, no lemon. The waiter nodded and disappeared. Sonia stared at Joseph. How did you? You mentioned it once, he said, as if it were nothing. As if remembering tiny details about her preferences was completely normal. At the community center. You were telling one of the kids about your post-performance ritual. Chamomile tea and stretching. That had been 6 months ago. A casual comment made in passing while Joseph's foundation representative had been touring the facility. Sonia had barely registered his presence that day, too focused on her students. But he'd been listening, remembering. You pay attention, she said softly, to things that matter. His dark eyes held hers. Yes. The tea arrived. Perfect temperature, perfect sweetness. Exactly how she liked it. And something inside Sonia's carefully constructed walls began to crack. The night continued in a blur of conversations and carefully orchestrated photo opportunities. But the small moments kept accumulating. When the museum's air conditioning kicked up and she shivered slightly, Joseph's jacket was around her shoulders before she could say a word. When someone made a snide comment about new money trying to buy class, his jaw tightened and he smoothly redirected the conversation, protecting her from the verbal barb. When her ankle, always her damn ankle, started to ache from standing in heels, he'd somehow procured a chair and positioned himself to block anyone from seeing her grimace of pain. You don't have to do all this, Sonia whispered during one of their brief moments alone. The jacket, the tea, the everything. I know, Joseph said simply. Then why? He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Because no one else is going to. It was such a simple statement. Such a devastating truth. The gala ended late, nearly midnight. In the car ride back to her apartment, Sonia felt the exhaustion settling into her bones. She leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights blur past. Thank you, she said quietly. For tonight. For all of this. You don't have to thank me. I do, though. This isn't your responsibility. I'm not your responsibility. Joseph was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to respond. But then he said, voice low and rough in a way she'd never heard before, maybe I want you to be. Sonia's head snapped up. She looked at him, really looked at him, in the dim light of the car. His profile was sharp, beautiful, but there was something vulnerable in the set of his shoulders. Something that made him look less like an untouchable billionaire and more like a man. Just a man. Joseph. Don't, he said softly. Don't analyze it. Don't question it. Just let it be what it is. But what was it? Sonia wanted to ask. What were they? But fear stopped her. Fear that if she named it, if she pulled at that thread, the whole carefully woven illusion would unravel. So instead, she reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his where it rested on the seat. His fingers immediately intertwined with hers. Warm. Real. Solid. And for the rest of the drive, they stayed like that, hands clasped in the darkness, neither of them speaking, both of them pretending this was still pretend. The following week passed in a strange, dreamlike rhythm. By day, Sonia still worked at the diner. She'd refused to quit, insisted on maintaining some piece of her real life even as the fantasy consumed her nights. By evening, she transformed into someone else, Joseph Bliss's mysterious fiancé, the former dancer who'd captured a billionaire's heart. The tabloids ate it up. Photos of them at various events circulated online. Think pieces about unlikely love stories and modern fairy tales proliferated. Someone had even dug up old footage of Sonia dancing, before the accident, and created a viral video contrasting her ballet performances with recent photos of her on Joseph's arm. Maya had watched one of the videos with tears in her eyes. "The internet is calling you Cinderella," she'd said. Cinderella's story was a lie too, Sonia had reminded her. But was it still a lie? That was the question that haunted her as another Friday night arrived and she found herself once again in Joseph's penthouse. This time not for an event, but because he'd insisted on cooking her dinner. "You cook?" she'd asked, surprised. "I've been known to heat things," he'd replied with that slight smile that she'd learned meant he was being modest. Now, standing in his kitchen, all marble and steel and gleaming appliances that probably cost more than cars, Sonia watched as Joseph moved with surprising competence, preparing what looked like a surprisingly elaborate meal. "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked, perched on one of the bar stools, sipping wine that probably cost more than her weekly paycheck. "Trial and error." He glanced at her. "I was on my own from a young age. Had to figure things out." It was the most personal thing he'd ever told her. Sonia wanted to press, wanted to ask about his childhood, his family, the boy he'd been before becoming this powerful man. But something in his posture told her not to push. Not yet. So instead she said, "It smells amazing. Wait until you taste it before complimenting me." But when he served the meal, perfectly grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, some kind of elegant sauce she couldn't name, it was delicious. Better than delicious. It was made with care, with attention to detail, with the same precision he brought to everything else. They ate at his dining table, which could probably seat 12 but felt intimate with just the two of them. The conversation flowed easily, about her students at the community center, about his latest business acquisition, about everything and nothing. And then, without warning, the room started to spin. Sonia set down her fork, her hand trembling. I don't feel well." Joseph was at her side in an instant. His hand touched her forehead, and his expression tightened. "You're burning up." "I'm fine," she tried to say, but the words came out slurred. The wine glass in her hand slipped, and Joseph caught it before it could shatter. "You're not fine." His voice was firm but not harsh. "How long have you been feeling sick?" "Just today. Thought it was just tired." The room was definitely spinning now. "Should go home. Maya will." "You're not going anywhere." Joseph's arm slid around her waist, supporting her weight as he guided her toward the couch. "Just sit. Stay here." Sonia wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle herself, but her body had other ideas. The moment she sank into the soft leather couch, her eyes started to drift closed. She heard Joseph on the phone, calling someone, his voice clipped and professional. A doctor, probably. Of course he had a doctor on call. Rich people always did. But then the call ended, and instead of distant professionalism, she felt gentle hands helping her lie down, a soft blanket being tucked around her, a cool cloth being pressed to her forehead. "What are you doing?" she murmured, eyes still closed. "Taking care of you." Joseph's voice was close, soft. "Go to sleep, Sonia. I've got you." "You don't have to." "I know." His fingers brushed hair back from her face, the gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "Sleep." So she did. Sonia woke to darkness and the sound of rain against windows. For a moment, she was disoriented. This wasn't her apartment, wasn't her worn couch or thin blankets. Everything was too soft, too expensive, too not hers. Then memory flooded back. Joseph's penthouse. Dinner. Getting sick. She sat up slowly, her head pounding but no longer spinning. Someone, Joseph, had removed her shoes and covered her with what felt like a cashmere blanket. A glass of water sat on the coffee table beside her, along with fever medication and a handwritten note in elegant script. "Take these when you wake up. Kitchen if you need anything. J." Sonia took the medication and stood on shaky legs. The penthouse was quiet, dimly lit by strategic accent lights. She wandered toward where she remembered the kitchen being and found Joseph there, sitting at the island with his laptop, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled. He looked up when she entered, and relief flashed across his face. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck." Her voice was rough. "What time is it?" 3 a.m. He stood, already moving toward the stove. "Sit. I'll make you something." "Joseph, you don't need to." "Sonia." He turned to face her, and the expression in his eyes stopped her protest cold. "Let me take care of you. Please." So she sat. 20 minutes later, he set a bowl of rice porridge in front of her. Simple, perfect, exactly what her body needed. She stared at it, then at him. "You made this?" "At 3 in the morning. I watched a video." He sat beside her, not eating, just watching her with those intense dark eyes. "The internet said it's good for fevers." "You Googled what to feed me?" "I Googled several things." A slight smile. "How to reduce fever. What foods are gentle on the stomach. Whether I should call an ambulance." "Joseph." Sonia's voice cracked. "You really didn't have to do all this." "You've said that before." He reached out, his hand covering hers on the table. "And I'll give you the same answer. I know I don't have to. I want to." Sonia looked down at their joined hands. His was so much larger than hers, darker-skinned, elegant fingers, calluses she wouldn't have expected on a man who worked behind a desk. Evidence of a past she didn't know, a life before the suits and the empire and the untouchable CEO persona. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you want to?" Joseph was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he said, voice rough and honest in a way that made her heart stutter, "Because someone should have wanted to a long time ago. Because you deserve someone who wants to. And because—" He hesitated, then continued, "Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and real and devastating. Sonia lifted her eyes to his, and what she saw there took her breath away. Not the cold CEO. Not the calculated billionaire. Just a man, lonely, searching, achingly vulnerable, looking at her like she was something precious. Something worth protecting. "This isn't pretend anymore," she said. "Not a question. A realization." "No," Joseph agreed softly. "I don't think it ever was." He fed her small spoonfuls of porridge when her hands trembled too much to hold the bowl steady. He brought her fresh water and more medication. He dampened a cloth and pressed it to her forehead when the fever spiked again. He stayed beside her through the long hours of the night, checking her temperature, adjusting the blankets, making sure she was comfortable. And when dawn finally crept through the windows, painting the city in shades of gold and pink, Sonia woke to find Joseph asleep in the chair beside the couch, still dressed in his rumpled shirt and slacks, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, exhaustion etched across his beautiful face. No one had ever stayed before. Not through the hard parts. Not through the mess and the fever and the unglamorous reality of taking care of someone. Donald certainly hadn't. But Joseph had. This powerful, untouchable man had stayed up all night to watch over her, had cooked for her at 3 a.m., had held her hand through the darkness. Sonia watched him sleep, her heart doing something dangerous in her chest. Something that felt terrifyingly like falling. She'd believed in love once. It had nearly broken her. But looking at Joseph now, this complicated, careful man who'd somehow become her anchor, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could believe again. Even if it terrified her. Especially because it terrified her. Raise your hand if you're falling for Joe Bliss just as hard as Sonia is. This is what real love looks like, friends. Staying up at 3 a.m. to cook porridge, remembering how someone takes their tea, caring for them when they're at their most vulnerable. If this story is touching your heart, smash that like button and share it with someone who believes in second chances and real love. And tell us, what time is it where you are right now? Drop a comment with your location. We're reading every single one, and we love our global Incredible Stories family. 2 weeks after the fever night, Sonia found herself with a key to Joseph's penthouse. It's practical, he'd said when presenting it to her over coffee at the diner. The one place they could be relatively normal, where she was still just Sonia the waitress and he was. Well, Joseph Bliss would never be just anything, but at least here at her corner table during her break, they could pretend. Practical, she'd repeated, staring at the small silver key like it might bite her. You're here 3 or 4 times a week anyway. The doorman knows you. My housekeeper knows you. It makes sense for you to be able to come and go without having to call ahead. What he didn't say, but what they both understood, it made them look more like a real couple. More committed. More believable. What he also didn't say, but what Sonia heard in the spaces between his words, I want you to feel like you belong here. With me. So now, on a quiet Thursday evening when she'd finished her shift early and Joseph had texted that he'd be home late from a meeting, Sonia let herself into the penthouse using her key. It still felt surreal. Walking into a space worth more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. The floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that looked like a postcard. The art on the walls that was probably worth more than most people's houses. But it was starting to feel familiar too. She knew where Joseph kept the good tea. Knew which couch was most comfortable for curling up with a book. Knew that he liked everything precisely arranged except for his personal study, which was organized chaos that somehow made perfect sense to him. His study. She'd never been in there before. It felt too personal, too much like crossing a line. But now, with time to kill and curiosity building, Sonia found herself drawn to the door at the end of the hallway. She knocked first, absurd, since she was alone in the apartment, then pushed it open. The room was exactly as she'd imagined and nothing like she'd expected. Not sterile or intimidating, but warm. Lived in. Books lined the shelves. Not just business texts but novels, poetry, philosophy. A record player sat in one corner with a collection of vinyl that ranged from jazz to classical to what looked like old soul music. The desk was exactly as she'd pictured. Controlled chaos. Papers in neat stacks, multiple monitors. A fountain pen that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But it was the wall above the desk that stopped her cold. A photograph. Small, framed simply, but positioned where Joseph would see it every time he sat down to work. Sonia moved closer, her heart starting to beat faster even before she fully processed what she was seeing. The photo was old, the colors slightly faded, the edges worn. It showed a gymnasium, clearly in need of repair. Cracked tiles on the floor. A makeshift bar mounted to one wall. Afternoon sunlight streaming through high windows. And in the center of the frame, a young woman in a simple black leotard, her natural hair pulled back in a somewhat messy bun, her arms extended in a graceful arabesque. Around her, a group of children, maybe 10 or 12 of them, sitting in a semicircle, their faces upturned, watching her with expressions of pure wonder and delight. The woman was her. Younger, maybe 19 or 20, but unmistakably her. Her face full of light and purpose, her body strong and whole and beautiful in motion. Before the accident. Before Donald. Before everything fell apart. This was from the orphanage. From St. Michael's, where she'd volunteered during her junior year of college, teaching basic ballet to kids who'd probably never seen a dance performance in their lives. She'd gone every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 months, until her performance schedule got too demanding and she'd had to stop. She hadn't thought about those days in years. They'd been sweet, meaningful, but ultimately just one chapter in a life that had since been completely rewritten. But Joseph had this photo. Framed. On his wall. In a position of prominence in his most private space. Sonia's hands trembled as she reached out to touch the frame, her fingers tracing the glass as if she could reach through time to touch that younger version of herself. The girl who'd believed she could change the world one grand jeté at a time. I didn't know anyone was taking pictures, she whispered to the empty room. The director of the orphanage took them for their newsletter. Sonia spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Joseph stood in the doorway, still in his work suit but with his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," Sonia said immediately. "I shouldn't have come in here. I know it's private, It's fine." He stepped into the room, his eyes going to the photograph, then back to her. "You can go anywhere in this apartment, Sonia. I have no secrets from you." But he did. She could see it in the tension in his shoulders, in the way his jaw tightened when he looked at that photo. There was a story here. One he'd been keeping from her. "This is me," she said unnecessarily. "At St. Michael's Orphanage. I volunteered there for a while when I was in college." "I know. How do you have this picture?" Joseph moved closer, stopping beside her to look at the photograph. In the soft light of his study, he looked younger somehow. More vulnerable. "Someone took it," he said quietly. "I found it years later, going through old papers from my time there. I kept it." "Your time there?" Sonia's breath caught. You were at St. Michael's." He nodded once. "From age 10 to 18. Not the best years of my life, but formative." Sonia stared at him, her mind racing. Joseph had been at St. Michael's. During the same period she'd been volunteering there. Which meant, Did I teach you?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "You tried." A slight smile ghosted across his lips. "I wasn't very good. Too angry, too closed off. Most of the time I just sat in the corner and watched." The pieces were clicking into place. The way he'd looked at her that first night at the wedding, like he'd recognized her. The way he'd agreed so quickly to her desperate plea. The photograph. The ballet slippers he'd given her, custom-made, perfect. "The boy in the corner," she whispered. "Quiet. Thin. Always watching but never participating. That was me." "Oh my God." Sonia sat down heavily in the chair behind her, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "You've known this whole time. Since the wedding. Since I crashed into you and begged you to." "Act like I loved you," he finished. "Yes. I knew. Why didn't you tell me?" Joseph turned away from the photograph to face her fully. "Because I wanted you to see me as I am now, not as I was then. That boy was broken, Sonia. Angry at the world. He had nothing and no one and no future. I didn't want you to look at me and see him." "But he's still you," Sonia said softly. "He's still part of who you are." The part one spent years trying to forget. Joseph's voice was rough now, stripped of its usual polish. "I built myself up from nothing. Made something of my life. Became someone who matters. But sometimes," he stopped, swallowed hard. "Sometimes I still feel like that kid in the corner. Watching everyone else live while I just exist." Sonia stood and moved toward him, her heart breaking for the boy he'd been and the man he'd become. "I remember you," she said. "Not clearly, not specifically, but I remember. You never smiled. You never danced. But you never missed a session either. You were always there, always watching. You were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." The words came out raw, honest, devastating. "Not just physically, though you were. But the way you moved, the way you talked to those kids like they mattered. Like we mattered. Like we weren't just charity cases or problems to be solved, but people worth teaching. Worth caring about." Tears pricked at Sonia's eyes. "Joseph." "You gave me a ballet slipper," he continued, as if he couldn't stop now that he'd started. "On your last day. I don't know if you remember. You probably gave them to all the kids. But you pulled me aside, gave me this old worn slipper, and told me, his voice cracked. You told me that if I ever made it out, if I ever found my place in the world, I should help someone the way you were trying to help me. Sonia did remember. Vaguely, hazily, like a dream from another lifetime. She'd been cleaning out her dance locker, getting rid of old slippers, and had brought them to the orphanage thinking the kids might find them interesting. Most of the children had fought over them like they were treasures. But there had been one boy, quiet, watching from the shadows, who hadn't fought for anything. So she'd given him one. A small gesture. Meaningless, really. Except it hadn't been meaningless. Not to him. I kept it, Joseph said. Moved it from foster home to foster home. From my first apartment to every place after. From office to office as my business grew. I kept it because it reminded me that someone once saw me. Someone once believed I was worth saving. You saved yourself, Sonia whispered. No. He looked at her with eyes that held decades of pain and loneliness and something achingly vulnerable. You saved me first. You showed me that I could be more than the angry kid everyone had written off. That I could be someone worth seeing. Sonia couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. All this time, she'd thought Joseph was helping her out of kindness or strategy or some billionaire's whim. But he'd been paying forward a debt he thought he owed. Protecting her the way she'd once protected him, even if she hadn't known she was doing it. The wedding, she managed. When I asked you to act like you loved me. I said yes because saying no to you has never been an option. Joseph's voice was barely above a whisper. Not then. Not now. Not ever. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and memory and truth. Sonia looked back at the photograph on the wall, that young woman teaching, that group of children watching, and somewhere in the shadows, a boy whose life had been changed by one small act of kindness. I don't remember giving you the slipper, she admitted. I don't remember you specifically from those days. And I'm so sorry for that. Don't be. Joseph stepped closer, his hand reaching up to cup her face with heartbreaking gentleness. You had no reason to remember. You were teaching dozens of kids. You had your own life, your own dreams. One awkward teenager in the corner shouldn't have registered. But you remembered me. I never forgot. His thumb traced her cheekbone, his dark eyes searching hers. Not for a second. Not for a day. You've been in my head for 13 years, Sonia. Every success I've had, every deal I've closed, every moment I've stood on top of the world. Part of me was always that boy in the corner, watching you dance and thinking maybe someday I'd be worthy of your attention. Joseph. Sonia's voice broke on his name. You're not that boy anymore. You're still him, he said, just wearing better suits. No. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling his heart beat fast and hard beneath her palms. You're the man who stayed up all night to take care of me when I was sick. Who remembers how I take my tea? Who defends me when I can't defend myself? Who looks at me like I'm worth something even when I don't believe it myself? That's who you are. Because of you, he insisted. Because of what you showed me was possible. Then let me show you something else. Sonia rose on her toes, her hands sliding up to cup his face. Let me show you that you're worth it too. She kissed him. Not like at the wedding, where it had been performance and desperation. Not like in the car, where it had been comfort and connection. This kiss was truth. Gratitude. Understanding. Recognition of something that had been building between them since that first night. Maybe even longer. Joseph made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. The kiss deepened, became something more, not just physical, but emotional. Like they were trying to communicate 13 years of missed connections and misunderstandings and the strange, beautiful path that had brought them back together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Joseph rested his forehead against hers. I have something for you, he said. He moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small box. Not jewelry, Sonia could tell by the shape. Something else. When he opened it, she gasped. Inside, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a ballet slipper. Old worn, the satin faded and frayed. The one she'd given him 13 years ago. "You really kept it," she whispered. "I told you. You saved me." He placed the slipper carefully in her hands. "I kept this as a reminder. But I think," he paused, then continued, "I think maybe it's time I gave it back to you. You lost so much when you were injured. Your career, your dreams, yourself. But this," he touched the slipper gently, "this is proof that you were always more than just your dancing. You were always someone who changed lives. Who mattered." Sonia looked down at the slipper, then up at him. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "I have something for you too," she said. She thought of the gift Joseph had given her after the fever night, the one she'd been too overwhelmed to properly acknowledge. He'd had custom ballet slippers made for her, not to dance in professionally, but to wear. To remember. To reclaim. "Wait here," she said. She ran to the living room where she'd left her bag and pulled out the shoebox she'd been carrying with her for the past week, waiting for the right moment. When she returned to the study, she placed the box in Joseph's hands. "You gave me new slippers," she said, "to help me remember I could fly again. So I'm giving these back to you." He opened the box. Inside was a pair of simple black ballet shoes, men's, size appropriate, nothing fancy. And tucked into one of them, a note. Joseph pulled out the note and read it aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been standing in the corner long enough. It's time to dance. S." When he looked up at her, there were tears in his eyes. Actual tears. This powerful, controlled man was crying, and it was the most beautiful thing Sonia had ever seen. "I don't know how to dance," he said, voice rough. "I know." She smiled through her own tears. "But I can teach you. If you'll let me." Joseph set the box down carefully and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. But she didn't care. She wrapped her arms around him and held him just as fiercely, two broken people somehow becoming whole together. "You've been teaching me all along," he whispered into her hair. "How to be human again. How to feel. How to believe I'm worth more than just my bank account." "And you've been teaching me," she whispered back, "that I'm more than my scars. More than my past. That I deserve someone who stays." They stood there in his study, surrounded by books and memories and the ghosts of who they used to be, holding on to each other like lifelines. Outside, the city glittered with a million lights. Inside, two people who'd found each other 13 years too late, or maybe right on time, finally admitted what they'd both been too afraid to say. This wasn't pretend anymore. This was real. This was love. 3 months after the wedding that had changed everything, Sonia stood in front of the mirror in Joseph's bedroom. Their bedroom now, though she still couldn't quite believe it, and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The transformation wasn't just physical, though that was part of it. The sleek blue gown she wore tonight, silk that draped like water, custom-made to fit her perfectly, would have been unimaginable a few months ago. Her hair, styled in elegant waves that framed her face, shone with professional care. Her makeup was subtle but expertly applied. She looked like she belonged in the world she was about to enter. But the real change was in her eyes. They weren't resigned anymore. They weren't defeated. They sparkled with something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Hope. "You look breathtaking." She turned to find Joseph in the doorway, and her breath caught. He was in a tuxedo, perfectly tailored obviously, but it wasn't the expensive fabric or the elegant cut that made her heart stutter. It was the way he looked at her. Like she was the only thing in the room. The only thing that mattered. 3 months, and she still wasn't used to it. "The gala will be boring," he warned, moving into the room to stand behind her. His hand settled on her waist, and he pressed a kiss to her bare shoulder that made her shiver. Politicians giving speeches. Donors trying to out-donate each other. The usual theater. Sounds riveting, Sonia said, leaning back against him. We could skip it. His lips moved to her neck. Stay here. Order takeout. Watch terrible movies. And disappoint 300 people who paid $1,000 a plate to see the mysterious Sonia Brown. She turned in his arms, smiling. Your PR team would murder us both. Worth it, he murmured, but he released her with obvious reluctance. Come on, then. Let's go be charming and philanthropic. The gala was being held at the plaza. Ironic, considering that was where everything had started 3 months ago. But as they pulled up in Joseph's car, Sonia felt none of the panic she'd experienced at Donald's wedding. This time, she belonged. This time, she had Joseph beside her, solid and real and hers. Hers. The word still felt dangerous. Too good to be true. Like at any moment, someone would wake her up from this beautiful dream and she'd be back in her coffee-stained apron, serving plates and pretending her ankle didn't hurt. But Joseph's hand was warm in hers, grounding her. Real. You're thinking too loud, he said as they entered the ballroom. I can hear the doubts from here. I'm not doubting, she lied. Liar. He turned her to face him, his dark eyes serious. Sonia, this is real. We're real. You need to start believing that. I'm trying. Try harder. He kissed her, brief but claiming, right there in the middle of the ballroom entrance. Because I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. The gala passed in a blur of champagne and conversations, donations and dancing. Sonia had gotten better at these events, knew how to smile, how to deflect intrusive questions, how to stand beside Joseph and play the part of the supportive fiancé. Except it wasn't playing anymore. When Joseph gave a speech about the importance of arts education and funding community centers like St. Michael's, looking directly at her during the most passionate parts, her chest swelled with pride. When an elderly donor cornered her and spent 20 minutes talking about her own ballet career, Sonia found herself genuinely engaged instead of just politely listening. When the orchestra struck up a waltz and Joseph led her onto the dance floor, his hand at her waist and his eyes on hers, she felt like she was flying. You're getting good at this, she told him as they swayed together. At what? Dancing? I had an excellent teacher. At letting yourself be happy. His expression softened. I had an excellent reason. They stayed late, much later than Joseph usually tolerated for these events. But Sonia was having fun, genuinely enjoying herself, and he seemed content to stay as long as she wanted. It was nearly midnight when they finally said their goodbyes and headed out to where his car waited. The rain had started, just a drizzle at first, but building into something heavier as they settled into the back seat. Joseph immediately pulled her close, and Sonia curled into him, her head on his shoulder, feeling warm and safe and impossibly content. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For tonight. For the last 3 months. For. She searched for words that could encompass everything he'd given her. Confidence, purpose, belief in herself. For seeing me. Always. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I'll always see you, Sonia. She was about to respond when the first flash hit, bright and sudden through the rain-streaked window. What? Sonia started, but then another flash came. And another. Paparazzi, Joseph said, his voice tightening. Just ignore them. They'll get bored. But they didn't get bored. As the car pulled out into traffic, a black SUV swerved in behind them. Too close. Aggressive. More flashes. The SUV was practically on their bumper now. Why are they so close? Sonia asked, sitting up straighter. Her heart had started to beat faster. Joseph. It's fine. But his jaw was clenched. Marcus, can you lose them? The driver, Marcus, who Sonia had gotten to know over the past months, nodded. I'll try, sir. He accelerated smoothly, changing lanes. But the SUV stayed with them, honking now, its driver clearly trying to force some kind of reaction for the cameras. This isn't normal, Sonia said, her voice rising. Joseph, there. Another flash, so bright it left spots in her vision. The SUV swerved again, cutting into their lane. Marcus tried to avoid it, jerking the wheel to the right. Everything happened in slow motion and too fast all at once. The screech of tires on wet pavement. Another vehicle, from where, Sonia would never be sure, slamming into their side. The sickening crunch of metal against metal. Sonia's scream, cut short by the impact. The world spinning, or maybe it was the car, she couldn't tell. Glass shattering. Airbags deploying. The smell of burnt rubber and something chemical. And through it all, Joseph's voice, raw with panic, Sonia. Then, nothing. Joseph's hands were shaking. That was the first concrete thought that penetrated the fog of shock and adrenaline. His hands, steady through boardroom battles and hostile takeovers, through every high-stakes moment of his adult life, were shaking so badly he could barely manage his seatbelt. Sonia. Her name came out strangled. Sonia, answer me. She was slumped against the window, her head tilted at an angle that made his heart stop. There was blood, not a lot, but any amount was too much, trickling from her temple down her cheek. Sonia. Louder now, desperate. He reached for her, his shaking hands cupping her face. Baby, please. Open your eyes. Nothing. Marcus was already on the phone with 911, his voice shockingly calm considering they'd just been in a car accident. Professional to the end. But Joseph wasn't calm. Joseph was the furthest thing from calm. He was that 13-year-old boy again, watching everything good in his life slip through his fingers, powerless to stop it. Stay with me, he whispered, his forehead pressing against hers. Her skin was too cool. Wrong. Please, Sonia. Please stay with me. I just found you. You can't, his voice broke. You can't leave me. Not now. Not like this. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later. 7 minutes that felt like 7 years. 7 eternities. The paramedics were efficient, professional, asking questions Joseph barely registered. He rode with her, his hand clutching hers, refusing to let go even when they needed to examine her. Sir, you need to give us space. No. The word came out hard, final. I'm not leaving her. Something in his voice, or maybe his face, made them relent. The hospital was a blur. Bright lights. Antiseptic smells. Doctors and nurses moving with urgent purpose. Joseph answered questions he didn't remember being asked, sign forms he didn't read, existed in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Finally, hours later or maybe minutes, time had lost all meaning, a doctor appeared. Mr. Bliss? I'm Dr. Patterson. I've been treating Ms. Brown. Joseph was on his feet immediately. Is she? She's stable. Mild concussion, some bruising, a few stitches for the laceration on her temple. She's very lucky. It could have been much worse. The relief was so intense it made Joseph's knees weak. He sat down hard in the nearest chair. Can I see her? Yes. But there's something you should know. Dr. Patterson's expression shifted to something more cautious. She's conscious, but she's experiencing some memory issues. Not uncommon with head trauma. She's disoriented, confused about where she is and what happened. But she'll be okay. The memories will come back. In most cases, yes. It might take hours or days, possibly weeks for more distant memories. But usually, the brain recovers these kinds of gaps. Usually. Joseph hated that word. Hated the uncertainty in it. But Sonia was alive. Conscious. Stable. That was what mattered. He followed Dr. Patterson down the sterile hallway to a private room. Through the window, he could see her sitting up in the hospital bed, looking small and fragile and utterly lost. "Ms. Brown," the doctor said gently as they entered, "you have a visitor." Sonia looked up, her eyes, those beautiful brown eyes, landing on Joseph. And for a moment, his heart soared because she was awake. She was looking at him, she was. "Who are you?" 3 words. Simple. Innocent. Devastating. Joseph felt the floor drop out from under him. "What?" "I'm sorry," Sonia said, and she did sound sorry. Confused and scared and sorry. I don't know you. Should I? Did you find me after the accident?" "Sonia." His voice was barely a whisper. "It's me. It's Joseph." Her brow furrowed. "I'm sorry. I don't remember anyone named Joseph." The doctor stepped forward, his voice professional and gentle. "Ms. Brown is experiencing some short-term memory loss. This is normal with concussions. Don't worry, in most cases, the memories return within a few days to a few weeks." But Sonia was looking at Joseph like he was a stranger. A kind stranger, maybe, but a stranger nonetheless. She didn't remember him. Didn't remember the wedding where she'd begged him to act like he loved her. Didn't remember the months of charity galas and quiet dinners and late-night conversations. Didn't remember the fever night when he'd stayed up cooking her porridge at 3 a.m. Didn't remember finding the photograph in his study, learning about the boy he'd been, the slipper she'd given him 13 years ago. Didn't remember falling in love with him. She didn't remember any of it. Joseph stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to breathe. This couldn't be happening. They'd finally found their way to each other after 13 years of missed connections and second chances. They'd finally admitted what they meant to each other. And now she looked at him with polite confusion, like he was just another concerned stranger hovering around her hospital bed. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice small. "You look upset. Did you know me? Before the accident?" "Know her." Past tense. Like they were already over. "Yes," Joseph managed. "I knew you. I know you." Present tense. Always present tense. "I'm sorry I don't remember." She looked down at her hands, and tears started to slip down her cheeks. "I don't remember much of anything right now. The doctor says it's temporary, but—" Her voice broke. "What if it's not? What if I never remember?" Joseph wanted to go to her, to hold her, to promise her everything would be okay. But he couldn't move. Couldn't function. Because the woman he loved was crying and scared and looking at him like he was a stranger, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. "Mr. Bliss," the doctor said quietly, touching his arm. "Perhaps it's best if we let Ms. Brown rest for now. You can come back tomorrow, when she's had time to process." Joseph nodded mechanically. He moved toward the door like a man underwater, every movement taking effort he didn't have. At the threshold, he looked back one more time. Sonia was still crying silently, staring at her hands, lost in a confusion he couldn't penetrate. "I'll come back," he said, though he wasn't sure she heard him. "I'll wait as long as it takes." But she didn't respond. Didn't even look up. Joseph left the hospital room and made it exactly 3 steps down the hallway before his legs gave out. He braced himself against the wall, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking. She didn't remember him. After everything, after 13 years of carrying her memory, after 3 months of falling in love with her all over again, after finally admitting to himself and to her that she was the only thing in his life that had ever truly mattered, she didn't remember him. The boy in the corner was alone again. And this time, he didn't know if he'd survive it. "Are you crying?" "Because we are." This is the moment that breaks us all. If you're invested in Sonia and Joe's love story, if you need to know how this ends, you have to subscribe and hit that notification bell right now. Comment "Remember" if you believe love can survive anything, even amnesia. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We want to send virtual hugs to everyone who needs them right now. And seriously, if this story has touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in the power of true love. Don't leave us hanging. Hit that subscribe button. The rain came back 4 days after the accident. Sonia watched it streak down the hospital window, creating patterns that her eyes tried to follow but her mind couldn't quite process. Everything felt that way lately, just slightly out of reach, like trying to remember a dream that dissolved the moment you woke up. The doctors kept saying the same thing: don't force it. The memories will come back when they're ready. But Sonia wasn't sure how much longer she could exist in this frustrating fog. She knew who she was: Sonia Brown, 26, former dancer turned waitress. She remembered her childhood, her cousin Maya, teaching at the community center. She remembered the accident that had ended her career 2 years ago. But the last several months? Complete blank. Like someone had taken an eraser to her mind and wiped away everything recent. The doctors said she'd been engaged, that she'd been living with someone, that her life had changed dramatically in ways she couldn't recall. And there was that man, Joseph, the one who'd been there when she woke up, looking at her with such devastation in his dark eyes that it had made her chest ache even though she didn't know why. He'd come back every day since. Never staying long, the nurses had explained that Dr. Patterson thought it was best not to overwhelm her, but always there. Always watching her with that same heartbroken expression that made her feel like she'd lost something precious without even knowing what it was. You should rest, the nurse said, coming in to check her vitals. Dr. Patterson says you can probably go home tomorrow if your scans stay clear. Home where? Sonia asked. I don't even know where I've been living. Your fiancé has been taking care of everything. He's a good man, that Mr. Bliss. Hasn't left the hospital except to shower and change. Been sleeping in the waiting room most nights. Fiancé. The word felt foreign. Wrong. How could she be engaged to someone she didn't remember? After the nurse left, Sonia's eyes drifted to the small table beside her bed. Someone, probably that mystery fiancé, had brought a few personal items. A phone she didn't know the password to. A book she apparently had been reading. And something else, something that had been there since the first day but that Sonia had barely registered until now. A ballet slipper. Old worn. The satin faded to a dull pink. The kind of slipper dancers kept as mementos, too broken in to perform with, but too meaningful to throw away. She picked it up carefully, her fingers tracing the frayed edges. Why would someone bring this to her hospital room? It clearly wasn't new, wasn't something to cheer her up. This was old. Important. Meaningful. Sonia clutched the slipper to her chest and closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her despite the afternoon hour. The doctors had said rest would help her brain heal. So she'd rest. And maybe, if she was lucky, she'd wake up remembering why this worn-out piece of satin made her heart ache. The dream came in fragments, disjointed and hazy. She was younger, her body strong and unbroken. She was dancing, not on a stage but in a gymnasium with cracked floors and peeling paint. Afternoon sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating dust motes that sparkled like snow. Children sat in a circle around her, their faces upturned and captivated. She was teaching them basic positions, simple movements, but they watched like she was performing magic. And in the corner, separate from the group, was a boy, maybe 13 or 14. Too thin, too quiet, watching her with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. She danced toward him, hand extended. Come on. Join us. He shook his head, retreating further into the shadows. You don't have to dance. You can just watch. But you're part of this too. You belong here. He didn't respond. But he didn't leave either. The scene shifted. She was cleaning out her dance bag, pulling out old slippers. The children crowded around, eager for any piece of her world. She distributed them like treasures, watching their delight. But she saved one. Walked over to the boy in the corner. "Here," she said softly, placing the worn slipper in his small hands. "I want you to have this." He stared at it like she'd given him something priceless. "Why?" His voice was rough from disuse. "Because someday, you're going to get out of here. You're going to make something of yourself. And when you do, I want you to remember that someone believed in you. That someone saw you." He looked up at her with eyes brimming with tears he wouldn't let fall. "Promise me something," she continued. "When you make it, and you will make it, help someone else the way I'm trying to help you. Pay it forward. Promise." He nodded, clutching the slipper to his chest like a lifeline. "Promise." Sonia woke with tears streaming down her face and a name on her lips. Joseph. She sat up in the hospital bed, her heart pounding. The dream, no, not a dream. A memory. A real, solid, precious memory. The orphanage. St. Michael's. She'd volunteered there during college. Had taught ballet to kids who'd probably never seen a professional performance in their lives. And there had been a boy. Quiet, damaged, always watching from the shadows. She'd given him a slipper. One of her old ones, worn from years of use. Had told him to pay it forward when he made something of himself. Joseph. The boy from the orphanage was Joseph. Her Joseph. The man who'd been sitting vigil at her bedside, looking at her with those devastated eyes because she couldn't remember him. But she did remember. She remembered now. And if the boy from the orphanage was Joseph, then everything else. More memories flooded back in a rush. The wedding. Donald and Victoria. Begging a stranger to act like he loved her. That stranger's smile of recognition. "Come with me." The kiss that had shattered her world and rebuilt it all at once. The months that followed. Charity galas and quiet dinners. The night he'd stayed up cooking her porridge at 3 a.m. The photograph in his study. The confession about who he'd been, who they'd been to each other 13 years ago. Falling in love, real, terrifying, all-consuming love, with a man who'd never forgotten her. Sonia threw off the hospital blankets, the worn ballet slipper still clutched in one hand. She barely registered the 4-line, pulling it free with shaking hands. Barely noticed the nurse calling after her as she ran out of the room in her hospital gown and bare feet. She had to find him. Had to tell him she remembered. Had to. Joseph sat in the hospital cafeteria, nursing his 4th coffee of the day, staring at nothing. He'd barely slept in 4 days. Couldn't eat. Couldn't function. Could barely breathe. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. The confusion. The polite apology. The complete absence of recognition. "Who are you?" 3 words that had destroyed him more thoroughly than any business failure, any setback, any loss he'd experienced in his carefully constructed life. He'd built an empire from nothing. Had climbed from orphan nobody to billionaire CEO through sheer force of will and determination. Had survived things that should have broken him. But this, losing Sonia's memories, losing her love, losing the future they'd been building together, this was breaking him. Mr. Bliss. He looked up to find a nurse from Sonia's floor looking concerned. "Is Ms. Brown all right?" She's gone, sir. Pulled out her 4 and ran out of her room about 5 minutes ago. We're trying to find her now, but I thought you should know. Joseph was on his feet before the nurse finished speaking. Where did she go? We don't know. We've checked the obvious places, but Joseph knew. Somehow, in the depths of his chest where logic didn't reach, he knew exactly where she'd gone. He ran. The hospital rooftop was technically off limits, but the lock had been broken for weeks and no one had bothered to fix it. Joseph burst through the door and found her there, standing at the edge of the rooftop garden, rain soaking through her thin hospital gown, the old ballet slipper clutched to her chest like a treasure. Sonia. She turned, and the look on her face made him stop dead. She was crying. But she was also smiling, a brilliant, beautiful, devastating smile that he'd been afraid he'd never see directed at him again. "The boy from the orphanage," she said, her voice breaking. "That was you, wasn't it?" The words hit him like a physical blow. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stare at her as she walked toward him through the rain, still clutching that damn slipper. "You remembered," he managed, his voice rough. "I remembered." She stopped in front of him, rain and tears mixing on her face. "You kept it. All these years. You kept the slipper I gave you." "I kept everything." Joseph's hands were shaking again. "Every memory. Every moment. Every second with you. I kept it all because you were the first person who ever made me feel like I was worth something." "Joseph." She reached up with her free hand, cupping his face. "You've always been worth something. Even when you were that scared boy in the corner. Even when you thought you were nobody. You were always someone. You were always worth seeing." "But you didn't see me," he said, and years of pain bled into those words. "Not then. You were kind to everyone. That slipper wasn't special. I was just another charity case." "Stop." Her voice was firm. "I may not have known you specifically then. May not have remembered you for 13 years. But you knew me. You saw me. And when I needed someone, when I was at my absolute lowest, you were there. You stayed. You've been staying ever since. Because I love you." The confession tore out of him, raw and undefended. "I've loved you since I was 13 years old, watching you dance and thinking you were made of light. I've loved you through every success that never felt like enough because you weren't there to share it. I've loved you through 3 months of pretending to be what I already was. I love you, Sonia. Even when you couldn't remember me. Especially when you couldn't remember me. Because real love doesn't need memory. It just is." Sonia's face crumpled. She launched herself at him, the ballet slipper still clutched between them as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "I love you too," she sobbed against his chest. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I forgot. I'm so sorry I made you think." "Sure." Joseph's arms came around her, holding her so tightly he was afraid he might hurt her. But he couldn't let go. Couldn't loosen his grip. "You didn't make me think anything. You were hurt. It wasn't your fault. But you looked so, when I woke up and didn't know you, you looked so broken." "I was broken." He pulled back just enough to cup her face, his thumbs wiping away tears that the rain immediately replaced. "I've been broken my whole life, Sonia. But you keep putting me back together. You did it when you were 19 and teaching at an orphanage. You did it 3 months ago when you asked me to act like I loved you. And you're doing it now, standing in the rain looking at me like I'm worth staying for. You are worth staying for." She pulled the ballet slipper from between them, holding it up. "This is my memory. My promise. 13 years ago, I told you to pay it forward. To help someone when you made it. And you did. You helped me when I was at my lowest. You saved me the way I apparently saved you. So we're even." Joseph tried to smile, but it came out shaky. No. Sonia's smile was brilliant despite her tears. "We're better than even. We're together. Finally, actually together." She kissed him then, not like at the wedding, where it had been performance. Not like the months that followed, where it had been falling in love. This kiss was promise. Commitment. Choice. "I choose you. I remember you. I love you." When they finally broke apart, both soaked to the skin and shivering, Joseph pulled her close again. "We should get you inside," he murmured. "You just had a concussion. This is incredibly medically inadvisable." "I don't care." Sonia burrowed into him. "I finally remember. I finally know. I'm not leaving until you believe it." "Believe what?" That this is real. That I'm not going anywhere. That you're stuck with me now, Joseph Bliss. He pulled back to look at her, this beautiful, strong, impossible woman who'd somehow become his entire world. I think I can live with that. Good. She grinned through her tears. Because I have plans for us. Oh, big plans. Starting with getting you to stop working 80-hour weeks. And teaching you to actually dance, not just sway at fancy galas. And, she paused, her expression turning serious. And helping you build that community center you've been talking about. The one that gives kids like you a real chance. The one that pays forward what I started 13 years ago. Joseph stared at her. You remember that conversation? I remember everything now. She touched his face gently. Every conversation. Every gesture. Every moment. It's all here. You're all here. She placed her hand over his heart. And you're not going anywhere. Never, he promised. I've spent 13 years trying to be worthy of you, Sonia. I'm not walking away now. You've always been worthy. She kissed him again, soft and sweet. You just couldn't see it. But I can. I see you, Joseph. All of you. The boy you were. The man you've become. And I love every version. They stood there in the rain, two people who'd been trying to save each other without realizing they were the only ones who could, holding on to each other like lifelines. And finally, after 13 years and one desperate plea at a wedding and 3 months of falling in love, they were home. 6 months later. The old Aurora Theater had been abandoned for nearly a decade, left to decay in a neighborhood that most people pretended didn't exist. But standing in front of it now, restored, renovated, brought back to life, Sonia could barely recognize it as the same building. The exterior had been repaired, painted a soft cream color that glowed in the afternoon sun. New windows sparkled. The marquee, once broken and dark, now proudly displayed, the Aurora Center for Arts and Community. And beneath that, founded by the Bliss Family Foundation in partnership with St. Michael's Children's Services. You're crying again, Joseph said softly, coming up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist. Happy tears, Sonia insisted, though she didn't bother wiping them away. It's so beautiful. I can't believe you did this. We did this, he corrected. This was always your vision. It had started as a dream, mentioned casually one night while they were curled up on his couch, watching the city lights through the windows. Sonia had been talking about her students at the community center, about how desperately they needed better facilities, more resources, more opportunities. And Joseph, being Joseph, had made it happen. The Aurora had been purchased, gutted, and transformed into everything Sonia had imagined and more. Dance studios with proper floors and mirrors. Music rooms with instruments. Art studios with supplies. A small theater for performances. And upstairs, computer labs and tutoring centers and quiet spaces for kids who just needed somewhere safe to exist. Come on, Joseph said, taking her hand. There's something I want to show you before the opening ceremony. He led her inside, through the gleaming lobby where volunteers were setting up refreshments for the ribbon cutting, down a hallway to the largest of the dance studios. Sonia stopped in the doorway, her breath catching. The entire back wall had been transformed into a mural. Painted in vibrant colors, unmistakably professional, it showed a young woman mid-pirouette, her arms extended gracefully, her expression joyful and free. Around her, a circle of children watched with wonder. And in the corner, just barely visible, painted in softer tones, was the shadow of a boy watching from the shadows. Is that, Sonia couldn't finish the sentence. The photograph, Joseph confirmed. From my study. I had an artist recreate it. I thought, he paused. I thought the kids who come here should know that someone believed in them. That someone saw them. Just like you saw me. Sonia turned to him, tears streaming freely now. It's perfect. There's more. He walked to the front corner of the studio and pointed to a small plaque mounted to the wall. Sonia moved closer to read it, and her breath caught all over again. This studio is dedicated to every dancer who's been told they're too broken to fly, and to the one who taught us all that strength comes from rising after the fall. SB. You put my initials on it, she whispered. It's your studio. Your legacy. Joseph pulled her close. Everything I've built, everything I've become, it all started with you believing I was worth saving. This place is that belief made permanent. Made real. Sonia buried her face in his chest, overwhelmed by emotion. In 6 months, her life had transformed completely. The engagement that had started as pretend had become real. They'd moved forward together, not erasing their pasts but building on them. She still taught at the community center twice a week. Still waitressed occasionally because she liked the normalcy, the reminder of where she'd been. Still went to physical therapy for her ankle, which might never be perfect, but was getting stronger. But now she also had this. A real chance to make a difference. To be more than her injury, more than her broken dreams. To be someone who mattered. The ceremony starts in an hour, Joseph said softly. We should get ready. But Sonia didn't want to move. She wanted to stay here, in this studio with its mural of who they'd been and who they'd become, holding on to the man who'd saved her by letting her save him first. Thank you, she finally said, for all of this. For believing in my dreams even when I'd stopped believing in them. Always. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I'll always believe in you, Sonia. It's the easiest thing I've ever done. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was beautiful. Politicians gave speeches. Donors congratulated themselves. Local news cameras captured every moment for the evening broadcast. But the best part came after, when the doors officially opened and the first families arrived. Children from St. Michael's and a dozen other shelters and programs, their faces lit with wonder as they explored the studios and classrooms. Parents who'd never had access to arts education for their kids, tearing up as they registered them for free classes. And in the corner of the main studio, where the mural showed a boy watching from the shadows, stood Joseph, no longer hiding. Sonia found him there hours later, after most of the guests had left. She slipped her hand into his, and together they looked up at the painting. Do you ever think about him? She asked quietly. The boy you were. Every day. Joseph's voice was soft, but not with pain anymore. Now when I think about him, I think about how far he came. How much he survived. How he became someone who could do this. He gestured at the center around them. Someone who could love you. He was always someone who could love me, Sonia said. He just didn't know it yet. They stood there in comfortable silence until the caretaker came to lock up for the night. As they left, Sonia looked back one more time at the mural, at the image of the girl she'd been and the boy he'd been, forever captured in the moment that had started it all. 1 month later, they returned to the Plaza Grand Hotel. Not for someone else's wedding this time. For their own. The ballroom where Sonia had once stood alone and terrified, where she'd begged a stranger to act like he loved her, had been transformed into something out of a dream. But instead of the opulent society wedding Donald had thrown, this was something different. Intimate. Meaningful. The guest list wasn't society pages and business connections. It was kids from St. Michael's, volunteers from the community center, the staff from Mason's Diner. Maya was Sonia's maid of honor, openly weeping through her makeup. Marcus, Joseph's driver and the man who'd been injured in the accident but had refused to blame them, stood as best man. And when Sonia walked down the aisle, not in an expensive designer gown but in a simple silk dress that let her move like the dancer she'd always be, she wore ballet slippers instead of heels. New ones. Custom-made. A gift from Joseph to match the ones he'd given her months ago. Joseph stood at the altar in a gray suit, his eyes locked on hers, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Not the cold CEO. Not the calculated billionaire. Just a man looking at the woman he loved like she'd hung the stars. When she reached him, he took both her hands, and the officiant began. But Sonia barely heard the traditional words. She was too focused on Joseph, on the way his hands trembled slightly in hers, on the sheen of tears he wasn't quite managing to hide. "I've prepared vows," Joseph said when it was his turn to speak. His voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "But looking at you now, standing here, all those carefully chosen words seem inadequate." He took a breath and continued. 13 years ago, a beautiful girl in a rundown gymnasium showed a broken boy that he was worth seeing. She gave him a worn ballet slipper and told him to pay it forward when he made something of himself. She didn't know, couldn't have known, that she'd given him something far more precious than a token. She'd given him hope. She'd given him belief. She'd given him a reason to survive. Tears spilled down Sonia's cheeks. In the audience, she could hear sniffling. Even the officiant looked suspiciously misty-eyed. 3 months ago, Joseph continued, that same girl, now a beautiful woman who'd survived her own breaking, asked me to pretend I loved her. And I said yes. Not because I was pretending, but because I'd never stopped loving her. Because she'd been the North Star I'd been navigating toward my entire adult life without even knowing it. He squeezed her hands gently. "Sonia Brown, you saved me before you knew me. You loved me when I didn't think I deserved it. You stayed when you could have run. And today, in front of everyone who matters, I'm making you a promise. I will spend the rest of my life paying forward the gift you gave me. I will see you. I will believe in you. I will love you with everything I am, everything I have, everything I'll ever be. From that boy in the corner to this man standing before you, you've been my light, my hope, my home. I choose you. Today. Tomorrow. Always." Sonia was openly sobbing now, not even trying to maintain composure. I didn't write anything," she managed. "Because I didn't know how to put into words what you mean to me. How do I tell you that you saved me too? That when my dreams died, you gave me new ones? That when I thought I was finished, you showed me I was just beginning?" She took a shaky breath. "You asked me to act like I loved you. But Joseph, there was never any acting. From that first night, when you looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth defending, I started falling. And I've never stopped. You're patient when I'm stubborn. You're strong when I'm weak. You see me, the real me, not the dancer I was or the waitress I became, but the woman I am. And you love all of it." She smiled through her tears. "You kept your promise. You paid it forward. You helped me when I needed help. And now I'm making you a promise. I will spend the rest of my life reminding you that you're worth loving. That you always were. That the boy in the corner and the man standing before me are both deserving of every good thing. I choose you. Today. Tomorrow. Always." The officiant's voice was suspiciously thick as he pronounced them husband and wife. And when Joseph pulled Sonia into his arms and kissed her, not for show, not for performance, but because he could, because she was his and he was hers and they were choosing each other every single day, the ballroom erupted in applause. But Sonia barely heard it. She was too focused on Joseph, on the way he held her like she was precious, on the way he whispered against her lips, "Hello, wife." "Hello, husband," she whispered back. And in that moment, surrounded by people who loved them, in the place where their story had truly begun, Sonia felt something she hadn't felt in years. Complete. 1 year later. The photograph hung in the main entrance of the Aurora Center, impossible to miss. It showed Joseph and Sonia on their wedding day, her head resting on his shoulder, both of them smiling with pure, unfiltered joy. And clutched between them, visible in the foreground, was an old ballet slipper, worn, frayed, priceless. Beneath the photo, engraved on a gold plaque, were the words, "Act like you love me. No, you always did." Every child who walked into the center saw it. Every volunteer. Every donor. Every person who needed reminding that love, real love, was worth fighting for. The center thrived. Sonia taught 3 classes a week, watching kids who'd been told they were too broken or too poor or too something discover that they could fly. Joseph sat on the board, using his business acumen to expand the program, to reach more neighborhoods, to give more kids a chance. And sometimes, late at night when the center was empty and quiet, they would stand together in that main studio with the mural on the wall, and remember the boy who'd been told he was worthless. Remember the girl who'd been told she was finished. Remember how they'd saved each other without even knowing it. Remember how pretend had become real. Remember how love, patient, persistent, powerful love, had healed what shouldn't have been healable and built what shouldn't have been possible. Do you ever regret it? Sonia asked one such night, her hand in his, her head on his shoulder. Regret what? Saying yes. That night at the wedding. You could have just walked away. Let me handle my own problems. But you didn't. Joseph pulled her closer, pressed a kiss to her temple. I couldn't walk away. Not then. Not ever. You asked me to act like I loved you, Sonia. But the truth is, I'd been loving you for 13 years. I was just waiting for permission to show it. Sonia tilted her head up to look at him. Best performance of your life? No. He smiled, that real smile that still made her heart stutter. Not a performance at all. Just the truth. Always the truth. She kissed him then, sweet and slow and perfect. And when they finally pulled apart, she whispered, "Take me home." Already there, Joseph whispered back. Wherever you are, I'm already home. They left the center hand in hand, walking past the photograph that told their story, past the mural that showed where they'd been, past the studios full of kids who would never know how much the 2 people who'd built this place had needed saving too. And as they stepped out into the night, the city glittering around them, the future stretching wide and bright and full of possibility, Sonia looked up at her husband and thought about the strange, beautiful path that had brought them here. She'd lost everything once. Her career, her dreams, her future. But in the losing, she'd found something better. She'd found home. She'd found purpose. She'd found love, real, lasting, built on truth love. And she'd found Joseph, the boy from the corner who'd become the man beside her. The one who'd kept a ballet slipper for 13 years. The one who'd said yes when she'd asked him to pretend. The one who'd loved her long before she'd known he existed. Thank you, she said softly as they walked. For what? For keeping your promise. For paying it forward. For seeing me. Joseph stopped walking, turned her to face him. In the glow of the streetlights, he looked exactly like the man she'd fallen in love with and nothing like him at all. Older. Wiser. At peace. Thank you, he said, for giving a broken boy a reason to hope. For teaching him that he was worth saving. For loving him even when he didn't remember how to love himself. Always, Sonia promised. Always, Joseph echoed. And they walked home together, 2 people who'd been too broken to fly learning how to soar together instead. Thank you for taking this incredible journey with us. If this story of love, memory, healing, and redemption touched your heart, if it made you believe that kindness can change a life and love can survive anything, then stay with us. Subscribe to HQ Incredible Stories for more heartfelt tales that remind you what it means to be human. Drop a comment telling us, what was your favorite moment from Sonia and Joe's story? What time is it where you are, and where in the world are you watching from? Your support means everything to us. Until tomorrow, stay kind, stay strong, and never stop believing that love, real, honest, patient love, is worth fighting for.